Two Boeing 747, face-to-face on a single runway, hidden beneath a thick blanket of fog. Moments earlier, they were just two routine flights, diverted by chance to a small island airport. But soon, confusion spread fast. Mixed radio calls, crowded taxiways, and almost zero visibility. Neither crew could see the other. Both believed they were cleared for takeoff. And then, in a split second, their paths crossed. What followed was a deafening explosion that turned the runway into a firestorm, killing hundreds within moments. This is the story of how one misunderstanding changed aviation forever. It was March 27, 1977, a quiet Sunday afternoon in the Canary Islands, but that peace would not last long. Tenerife, the largest of the Canary Islands, was never designed to handle heavy international traffic. Its Los Rodeos airport had only a single runway, surrounded by mountains and often blanketed in thick fog. That day, two Boeing 747s, one operated by KLM, the other by Pan Am, were never even supposed to be there. Both flights had been diverted after a terrorist bomb exploded at another nearby airport in Gran Canaria. So now, hundreds of passengers and crew from two of the world's biggest airlines were suddenly stranded at a small regional airport, waiting, frustrated, and unaware that fate had already written their names into aviation history. The first 747 to land at Tenerife was KLM Flight 4805, a Dutch jumbo jet commanded by Captain Jacob van Zanten, one of KLM's most experienced and respected pilots. Moments later came Pan Am Flight 1736 from the United States, led by Captain Victor Grubbs and First Officer Robert Bragg. Both planes were only supposed to stop for a short while, just until Las Palmas reopened after the bomb explosion. But delays began to pile up quickly. Tenerife's small terminal was overcrowded with diverted flights. The single taxiway was jammed with parked aircraft. When the KLM flight decided to refuel there, the entire taxi route became blocked, forcing the Pan Am flight to wait. Hours passed. Passengers grew restless. Crew members kept checking their watches, and outside, the weather began to turn. A thick Atlantic fog started to creep over the mountains, rolling across the runway and cutting visibility down to just a few hundred meters. Inside both cockpits, the atmosphere was changing too. The long wait had stretched nerves thin. Everyone wanted to leave, but the small airport's layout made every movement complicated. Finally, around 4:45 p.m., the KLM flight finished refueling and began taxiing down the only runway. Pan Am was instructed to follow, but to exit the runway at a specific turn, taxiway C3, and wait there until KLM took off. What neither crew could see was that the fog had grown thick enough to hide everything beyond a few hundred meters. From this point on, sight was useless. Only radio communication could keep them safe. By late afternoon, the fog at Tenerife North had thickened into a solid white wall. From the control tower, the controllers could no longer see the runway. Inside the KLM and Pan Am cockpits, the pilots could not see each other, or even the runway signs ahead. KLM Flight 4805 had reached the far end of the runway. Captain Van Zanten turned the massive Boeing 747 around, now facing straight down the fog-covered strip. He was ready to go. Meanwhile, the Pan Am flight was still taxiing behind, trying to locate exit C3 through the mist. Then came the crucial moment. The KLM crew radioed the tower. KLM 4805, we are ready for takeoff. The controller began giving them departure route instructions, explaining what to do after takeoff, but he never said the words cleared for takeoff. The captain, confident and experienced, misunderstood the message. He replied, "We are now at takeoff." The tower responded, "Okay, stand by for takeoff. I will call you." But at that exact moment, Pan Am's crew transmitted, "We are still taxiing down the runway." The two radio messages overlapped, creating a burst of static. Neither side heard the other clearly. Inside KLM's cockpit, the flight engineer grew uneasy. He asked, "Is he not clear? That Pan American?" But Captain Van Zanten, certain he had permission, said calmly, "Oh, yes." And with that, he pushed the throttles forward. The engines roared to life. The 747 began to roll, accelerating into the fog at full power. At the same time, Pan Am's crew finally spotted the taxiway sign. But it was too late to turn. They stayed on the main runway, directly in KLM's path. The two giants were now charging toward each other, one trying to take off, the other still taxiing, and neither could see the other through the fog. Through the blinding fog, the KLM 747 thundered down the runway, its engines screaming at full power. Inside the cockpit, Captain Van Zanten focused straight ahead. He could see nothing but white. The takeoff speed, that critical point of no return, was approaching fast. Down the same runway, just a few hundred meters ahead, Pan Am's jumbo jet was still taxiing. Captain Victor Grubbs and his co-pilot could barely make out the faint glow of the runway lights. And then, in the distance, they saw it. Two bright landing lights, rushing straight toward them. Grubbs shouted, "There he is! Look at him! God damn, that son of a... He is coming!" He slammed the throttles forward and tried to turn off the runway. But the 747 was too large and too slow. Inside KLM, the flight engineer suddenly caught sight of a dark shape through the fog. Another aircraft. Van Zanten yanked the control column back, trying desperately to lift off. The nose came up. The tail scraped the runway. Sparks flew. For a moment, it looked like he might clear the Pan Am jet, but the main landing gear struck the top of Pan Am's fuselage. The impact tore the upper section open like paper. Fuel erupted into flames. A massive orange fireball ripped through the fog. The KLM jet, heavy with more than 55,000 gallons of fuel, lifted slightly, then slammed back onto the runway, exploding on impact. Every soul on board, 248 people, perished instantly. Pan Am's cockpit was torn apart, flames devouring the forward section. Passengers in the rear, dazed and terrified, saw gaping holes ripped through the fuselage. Some leapt 20 feet down to the tarmac, escaping just seconds before fire consumed the plane. Out of 396 people on Pan Am, only 61 survived. The rest were lost in the inferno that turned Tenerife's runway into hell. For several long minutes, there was silence. No one in the control tower understood what had just happened. The fog hid everything. Then came the radio calls, faint, desperate voices calling for help. And only then did the world realize the deadliest accident in aviation history had just unfolded. When rescuers finally reached the runway, all they could see was a sea of burning wreckage. The fog was still thick. Flames were still rising. The control tower had no idea what had actually happened, only that two Boeing 747s were missing from radar. As the fires burned through the night, investigators arrived at Tenerife North Airport. What they found was almost unimaginable. Two of the largest passenger jets in the world had collided head-on the same runway during one of the busiest diversion days in aviation history. But how could this possibly happen? Investigators began piecing together the events, listening to cockpit voice recordings, decoding air traffic control transmissions, and interviewing the few survivors who had made it out alive. Soon, a clear pattern began to emerge. It was not just one mistake. It was a chain of small errors, each one leading to the next. The bomb explosion at Las Palmas forced both flights to divert. KLM's decision to refuel blocked the taxiway, causing long delays. Then, the thick fog rolled in, cutting visibility down to almost zero. Pan Am missed the C3 exit, leaving them still on the runway. And most critically, a miscommunication between KLM and the control tower led Captain Van Zanten to believe he was cleared for takeoff, when he was not. The cockpit voice recorder revealed a haunting exchange. KLM's flight engineer had asked, "Is he not clear? That Pan American?" But Captain Van Zanten, one of KLM's most respected and experienced pilots, replied with confidence, "Oh yes." That brief moment of human hesitation, that single split-second decision, became the difference between safety and disaster. When investigators replayed the tapes, they discovered something even more chilling. At the exact second the KLM captain said, "We are now at takeoff," the Pan Am crew transmitted, "We are still taxiing down the runway." The two messages overlapped, canceling each other out in static. That tiny burst of noise, that single second of distortion, was enough to seal the fate of 583 people. In the weeks following the crash, the world was in disbelief. How could two highly experienced crews, flying the safest aircraft of their time, collide on a single runway? It seemed impossible, yet it had happened. The final investigation report revealed a painful truth. This disaster was not caused by one person or by one mistake. It was the result of a chain reaction built from miscommunication, human stress, poor visibility, and flawed procedures. Captain Jacob Van Zanten of KLM was considered one of the airline's finest. He was even featured in KLM's own safety advertisements. That made the tragedy even harder to accept. A respected pilot, trusted by thousands, had made one fatal assumption. But from the ashes of Tenerife, aviation began to change. Air traffic phraseology was rewritten. The words "cleared for takeoff" could now be spoken only once, and only by air traffic control. No other phrase would ever sound similar again. Ground radar systems became mandatory at all major airports, allowing controllers to see aircraft even through fog or darkness. Runway markings and signage were standardized around the world, ending confusion about taxiway exits. And perhaps the most important change of all, crew resource management, or CRM, was born. A new philosophy that taught pilots and crew members to question, challenge, and double-check one another, no matter the rank or experience. From that point on, no one's word would ever go unquestioned again. Because of Tenerife, aviation learned one of its most painful lessons. That experience without communication can still lead to disaster. Today, when a pilot hears the words "cleared for takeoff," there is always a pause, a confirmation, and an unspoken memory of 1977, of the day two Boeing 747s vanished into the fog and changed aviation forever. The Tenerife Airport disaster remains the deadliest accident in aviation history, a tragedy that reshaped every cockpit, every control tower, and every takeoff since. As the smoke cleared from Tenerife's runway, the world of aviation stood still. It was more than just an accident. It was a lesson written in fire, a reminder of how fragile safety can be when communication fails. Every switch, every call, every word exchanged between cockpit and control tower now carries the echo of that day in 1977. Hundreds of lives were lost, but their memory reshaped the very foundation of flight safety. Today, when passengers board a plane, they place their trust in a system built upon the lessons of Tenerife. Behind every calm announcement, behind every coordinated decision, lies a silent promise: this will never happen again. The Tenerife Airport disaster remains one of the darkest chapters in aviation history and one of the most important, because sometimes tragedy does not just take lives, it changes the world.